Good afternoon and welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission meeting. Today is November 4, 2013. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Camargo,
Here.
Commissioner Chan, President Yao,
Present.
Commissioner Ajemian,
Present.
Commissioner Hale.
Here.
Next item, please.
2 consent items. A, approval of the September 19, 2013 special meeting minutes.
Any updates? No corrections? I just have one minor correction, just a clarification on the October 7th minutes. Gloria, if you can make a change to item C on renewable portfolio standards to the second paragraph about the fourth column where it says Commissioner Yao inquired if GWP provide greenhouse dividends. I think I was referring to the greenhouse gas dividends where we'll be talking about today in item 4C, so you can add greenhouse gas dividends. So greenhouse dividend didn't sound right. Besides that, any other comments or revisions? If not, then I declare the minutes to be approved for both. So no comments on September 19th minutes either? Great. So let's declare that approved with that minor change.
Okay.
Thank you. Next item, please.
3, GWP Commission staff comments.
So I requested staff to add this agenda item so that if there are any staff comments or announcements, this can be the appropriate place for that, as well as commissioner comments or maybe anything that you might want to say that is not on the agenda. So this will be the appropriate item to put there. So I'd like to have this as an ongoing agenda item just in case we need that so that we can discuss it without, or not no discussion, but to make any announcements or comments to fact or items that are not on the agenda. Okay? So are there any staff comments at this point? No staff comments? Or announcements? No announcement this time? What about the, do you want to comment anything about the utility day? Would this be the appropriate time to mention that, or is that?
Absolutely. If there's an update or any information about Utility Day, this would be appropriate.
Okay. Mr. Zhou, you want to mention how that went?
Yeah, Mr. President, members of the Commission, it was fantastic. It was an absolutely wonderful day. I think that everybody who attended enjoyed it. We had a large group of school kids who were just having a ball. Our staff was out there. I'm not sure in these situations who has more fun, the kids or the staff, because the staff really got into it. And then once the educational part with the kids was over, we opened it up to the public and to the rest of the city staff. We barbecued hamburgers and hot dogs, took tours of the power plant. We had booths set up. The various operations, electric, water, power plant, all had their own separate operations set up, customer service, conservation. And all in all, it was a great day. I'm very, very proud of the folks who put it together. I said to the staff, I was very proud to be a part of GWP, and it was a great event, and one we will continue to do each year. It's just one way for us to reward our employees by letting them tell people what it is that they do and what a great job they do, and also by having our community come in and see what it is that we do and give them an opportunity to ask questions and see what's kind of behind that screen. Sometimes you only know what you get in a bill, or you know, when you turn the lights on, okay, that was easy, but what does it take to do that? And so the staff got an opportunity to do it. But the organizing committee did such a great job in such a short time. As I said, I can't say enough about it. It was great. I can't wait till next year, and I hope we get some more people out there.
Great. Yeah, I saw the pictures, and they looked like a lot of kids enjoyed themselves that day. Great. So, any more comments or announcements? If not, let's move on to the next item, please.
4, reports, information. A, NERC-WEC compliance program update.
Mr. Zorn?
Yes, Mr. Yao, members of the Commission, as Mr. Boeg makes his way up, I think it would be appropriate if we mentioned, and I think staff had mentioned to you on 4B, feed and tariff, our resident expert and content expert was had a minor medical issue today and is not able to attend. I have to be honest with you, I don't think this has the full value without him being here. He's the one who came up with these formulas and developed this. We can certainly go through the PowerPoint presentation, but I don't think it would do it justice, nor would I think it would answer some of the specific questions you have. So unfortunately, we've bumped it once from October, and with us going off next month, it'll be January when we get back to you on this. But I just think it'll be a lot more worthwhile if we have the right person here to present that. So I just wanted to say that before we move through the rest of the agenda. With that said, here's Mr. Aboeg.
Thank you, Steve. Ramon Abueg, Chief Assistant General Manager for Electric, Water, and Compliance. Good afternoon. We're supposed to present to you quarterly updates on WEC and NERC, but frankly, because of the way how things are going, we haven't had too many things to report on. But we figured that it's a good time to at least bring you up to date on where we are with our compliance. Overall, we're doing very well with compliance. As we reported back in May, we did not have any findings on the first official audit that we had, and we passed with flying colors. So what we want to do is the recent activities that we have completed recently with respect to compliance. This is basically what we want to update you on, is our under-frequency load shedding program required by PRC 006. It's not a new standard, however, it's been updated recently, where we are with our sabotage training. The new requirement on misoperation reporting, BES definition, which is the bulk electric system that's been going on for about 3 years, by the way, just trying to define what a bulk electric system should be. And how many standards are we required to comply with? So to start, the under-frequency load shedding, that's a program that, with respect to the stability of the system, if there's a major outage out somewhere that affected the bulk systems of the transmission lines where the frequency drops below 60 hertz, our job, our responsibility is to either increase our generation or to drop load so that we don't compromise or contribute to the stability of the system. And what we have done is, or we continue to do, this is actually an old system, and we just continue to do what we're doing. And what we do is we program our relays, and we identify the number of feeders that we need to drop on a very short notice so that we can drop a minimum amount of load when necessary to make sure that there's enough generation to supplement the load system-wide. So we're meeting that compliance. We just upgraded our program, and we have just submitted that to WECC to demonstrate our compliance. Next, one of the things we committed to with respect to cybersecurity and security is we're supposed to train our employees at least once every 2 years. Seriously. So we were due for training back in September. And what we did different is that we now included the water department or the water staff in the training, because what we need is more boots on the ground, eyes in the field, because they are the ones that are familiar with the system. And what we figured is if it applies to electric, it also applies to water. So we trained all our field employees for electric, water, as well as the power plant. So they do, and what we train them on is, I'm sorry, and like to this time to acknowledge also that our police department, through Detective Steve Corrigan, who is the terrorism liaison for the Glendale Police Department, help us with the training. And the main focus in training is really two things. I mean, although there's 5 in the procedures. By the way, this is a poster that we have now posted throughout our bulletin boards to keep reminding our folks that when they see something, they recognize something, they report it. That's really the main message, is we don't want them to address the issue themselves because they're not experts. We want them to know what is normal, what's abnormal, and report when necessary, and gave them the different numbers to call and who they need to notify, and we'll get the ball rolling for them. Okay, so again, it's our main policy is a 5-step process: recognize it, evaluate it, report it, act if necessary, and this reporting part, if we verify that there is any sabotage act, that we do reporting to the right parties. And what we have a picture here is we use the airplane crash that we had a couple of years ago, because this is one of those prime examples where we had to report and demonstrate it's not a sabotage attack, a simple accident that happened. And one of the new things that came out, one of the requirements is they now want us to report on any misoperation on a more regular basis. And part of this misoperation is doing a root cause analysis when there's a major event that happens. None of this is new to us, because any major events, as you know, when we report to you every month on our outages, we try to identify the root cause so we're fixing it so it doesn't happen again. Going back to the BES definition, this has been going on now for, like I said, a few years. I was actually part of the original team that in the industry that put together to define this 3 years ago, and it has been very cumbersome process. And what that means in terms of definition is they want to do the bright line, that if you have any system that's connected to 100,000 volts, or 200,000 volts. Right now it's staying at 100,000 volts. But what they have done as the industry is they now included or added some clarifications whether or not some systems should be excluded or some systems should be included. So there's more analysis now to verify whether or not they should be part of the bulk electric system. And what is important about being part of the system is whether or not you register your system as part of the WACNOC reliability, and that's really where that boils down to. And currently, based on everything that we're doing, it's an ongoing process. There are a total of 17 standards that we have to constantly make sure that we comply with and we do self-reporting on. And of that 17 standards, there's 107 requirements that we keep track of on a daily, regular basis. And other than that, there's really not too much exciting things to report about reliability, except that we are on track, we're doing well, and we haven't had any issues with respect to WAC and NERC. I'll take any questions.
Any questions? Mr. Bragg, thank you for the update. On the slide regarding the quarterly misoperation reporting, your third item mentions that GWP does not own applicable equipment for this category. What type of equipment would you be referring to?
What they're looking for is this, what they call the SPS, or Special Protective System, or anything that is directly connected to the bulk electric system, which is 100,000 volts and above. The equipment that we have is limited to 69,000 volts. And although we don't report internally, we still keep track of any misoperation that we do or that we have. Like I said, going back to root cause analysis.
That's great. Any other questions or comments? That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Bragg.
Thank you very much.
So the next item, as Mr. Zern had mentioned, item 4B, feed-in tariff. But I think Steve Lin has a brief update on the feed-in tariff.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, actually that item is going to be continued to the next available meeting, where we'll have Lon Peters come in and walk you through the formula that calculates the rate that we'll be paying anybody that participates in the program. I'm here to talk about 4C, which is a climate dividend. At last month's...
Steve, I think we better let her read it
Okay.
in the record.
Yeah, let's.
Is there any questions on the feed-in tariff before we move on?
Or
Yeah,
4B?
I think last time we discussed this, I asked for some sort of a load chart to be presented as well. If you remember, basically getting an idea of what the hourly load on the system is, correct?
In relation to the feed-in tariff?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I requested it last time, and it's not here, so if you can
We'll make sure you have it for our
make
next
sure that we have it for the next one.
And you were interested in the profile for a single day, kind of what the load looks like
Yeah, I mean,
throughout
basically I wanted to...
24-hour period?
Yes, and the reason behind it was to understand really what the peak hour calculation was based on.
Demand-based price.
Demand-based, right, yeah.
Can we enhance that low profile of just electricity usage, but overlay that with additional renewable energy profile that the city currently has with the 17 to 20% that we currently have on renewable energy, can we overlay the 24-hour load profile with where the renewable energy occurs, whether solar be in the afternoon, wind be overnight, geothermal? Can we
I'll
do
see if
that?
I can get a typical curve for solar and wind. They change every day, but I'll see if I can get kind of a typical profile so you can see how that relates to our typical 24-hour retail load profile and how they relate to each other. Sure.
Any other suggestions or anticipation of the next meeting's agenda item on this? Okay. All right, let's close that item. Next item, please.
4C, carb allowance dividends.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, once again, Steve Lenz, Chief Assistant General Manager. At last month's meeting, President Yao had mentioned that he heard about a program where ratepayers were given a dividend somehow related to carbon allowances and wanted us to take a look at that. So we went out, took a look. It turns out that the Air Resources Board mandated that investor-owned utilities in the state, which is Edison, Pacific Gas and Electric, and San Diego Gas and Electric, auction their freely allocated carbon allowances in the state cap-and-trade auction. And the reason they mandated that was that they wanted to support liquidity in that auction. As a result of that, those utilities received revenue, and they were mandated by the PUC to distribute that revenue to their customers based on what they're calling a climate dividend. And so there's a whole ongoing docket at the California Public Utilities Commission that tells the investor-owned utilities how they need to distribute that dividend. The publicly owned utilities like Glendale were not mandated to sell their freely allocated carbon allowances in the auction. And in fact, we were given an exemption and allowed to put our freely allocated carbon allowances directly into our compliance account. So for example, Glendale basically is getting 600,000 tons of carbon allowances every year from now till 2020. And for the last 2 years, we've put that directly into our compliance account, and that's about the number of tons of emissions that we have. So we don't get any revenue from those allowances because they don't go into the auction. But the customers also aren't paying for those allowances because they're freely allocated to us and they go straight to compliance. The investor-owned utilities, although they give back this climate dividend, they then have to go into the market and buy the carbon allowances that they need to cover their emissions. And that's passed through their rates. So the investor-owned utilities have kind of a dual mechanism. They're giving a dividend for their revenue from the auction, but at the same time, they then have to go buy allowances to meet compliance, and that gets passed through the rates. And we didn't take the time to analyze exactly how that happens, but the bottom line for Glendale Water and Power is that there is no revenue and there's no need for a dividend mechanism to give some of that back to the ratepayers. But I'd be glad to answer any questions related to that, and we'll certainly keep an eye on it. Often these things, can go to the investor-owned utilities first, and at some point, you never know, that mechanism may be coming our way, but we'll keep our eye on it, and if it does, then we'll bring it back to you.
Well, thanks for the update, Mr. Lenz. Can you expand on the R impact, the allowance that we get? Can we sell that back to the investor-owned utility? When you mentioned that they have to go out and buy on the market, do we have an opportunity to sell those? And
we have an
make a profit?
opportunity to put it into the auction and sell it, but at the same time, we have a compliance obligation. And so in our case now, since we basically are short and we need all of our 600,000 tons of carbon allowances, we just put them directly into our compliance account and use those for compliance. And then if we have to go buy some more on the market, we'll go and buy them on the market. But we have an opportunity to sell them into the auction, but we see no need to sell them into the auction when we're just going to have to buy them back and use them for compliance.
So you mentioned that we're short. What do we have, and how much do we need to cover?
We have about 600,000 tons a year of emissions, and we have about 600,000 tons of free allowances. So it's fairly close, and as I mentioned, we put them all into the compliance account, and it covers our carbon.
So moving forward into the future, when this compliance of CO2, does that require that in the future we're going to get a fixed 600,000 tons, and then we have to go and buy more as we emit more in the future? Is that how it works?
We're getting that through 2020. We don't know what's going to happen after 2020. It may be that there's no, freely allocated carbon allowances, and at that point, depending on what our emissions are, which we're continually driving down because we are scaling in more renewables, and as we do that, our emissions are going down. So after 2020, we'll see what happens. But if we don't get freely allocated allowances, we'll have to go out and buy those in the market.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I brought it up because it goes to a decision point where I think the investor-owned utilities have a different mechanism on how they need to either pay back or reinvest. Like we put the free allowance back into our compliance bucket. So potentially that's a good move. I think we would support that. But if the decision is be made if we get excess allowance, for example, if that ever happens, where do we do it? Do we continue to put it back in the bucket for compliance, or do we give back to the ratepayer? So when certain times in the future when those decisions need to be made, I think we need to have that be a consideration for this commission before it goes to City Council. And that was my whole point for trying to understand this topic, so that if we do have to make those decisions, then if the commission can vet it out for us so that we can bring a more thoughtful decision to the City Council for them to make that decision.
We can look at that. Our view on this particular cost is it's one of many components of our system cost. And so if we get more allowances than we need, then those would be sold and the revenue would reduce system cost for everybody. And that's how we would approach that. It's the same with renewable energy credits or renewable energy. We buy that cost, it goes to the total system cost, and that cost is passed through to the ratepayers on a per kilowatt hour basis.
Yeah, that's great too, because I think that's just the same way as saying that we're giving back the money to the ratepayers because we're reducing system costs. It's the same thing as providing a dividend, like the investor-owned utility. They see it as a credit in the bill, but our customers might not see that. They see that, or they don't know that it's a low rate. But if they see a dividend line item in the bill, they know that we're getting that dividend back. So it might make more of an impact if they see it on the bill versus reducing the average system cost. So that's something that it's the same thing, but customers might not understand it. So potentially we have to lay it out for them. Yes, Mr. Hale?
So, I mean, what it sounds like to me is that the carbon market is sort of working exactly as it was designed. And we have a sort of unique arrangement in that we have unfettered 600,000-ton credits every year that we can just go and cash in, assuming that we don't need to use them for actual AB 32 compliance. So, in other words, if we do a good job of actually reducing our emissions and reducing our greenhouse gas portfolio in the electric system, we can actually go and cash those credits in and invest them in some other way by selling them at the auction, right?
Correct.
So I see two issues here. One is that we should do whatever we can while we have these free 600,000 ton credits every year in order to cash those in, sell them at auction, and reap a dividend for that we can reinvest back in the power system. I also see a big risk in 2020 because it sounds like that deal just goes away, and what happens after that is who knows. So that's another reason to then reinvest in the system and make sure that we are reducing our carbon emissions, because then the price of going out and getting those credits at the open market will be fully on the backs of the ratepayers. We won't have the deal that we have anymore.
Yes.
Depending on what the legislature does and depending on what CARB does for us. So.
Yeah, and even at the minimum $10, that's $6 million a year.
Right. So bottom line is, the more we do now to invest in lowering our greenhouse gas emissions, the better off we'll be as a utility. And the more that we can do to front load those things and reduce that burden by 2020, the more credits that we'll have to actually put back out on the market.
And to add to that, now that we have put in place the multi-year rate structure in our bond, we financially are now able to go out and shop the market for renewable projects. Those were all put on hold, as well as our capital projects. So Steve and his staff, working through SCAPA mostly, are looking at a variety of projects with, I will admit, some focus right now, initial focus on solar. Solar is coming down. Solar has been very cheap. SCAPA has just completed a couple of projects that were very favorable in pricing. Our solar portfolio isn't that robust. We have a little bit more wind probably, and so I think solar is a good bet right now, and the prices have been dropping for the last 3 or 4 years, if not more. So to that end, we're going to be a little bit, we have to. I mean, we're hitting this compliance period, and then it's time to get busy and move towards the ultimate mandate, or at least what today's existing mandate is. It could be something different, which is just going to drive us even harder to bring home renewable projects.
Right.
And if I may add, to the extent that we have some savings in our costs, that would appear on the customer's bill under the regulatory adjustment charge. So that can be a credit on the bill, or it can be an adder on the bill. So if our costs are below projected for, AB 32 compliance or any other regulation, then that could appear as a credit on the customer's bill.
Would that be automatic, or would that decision have to be made by the city council to make that type of adjustment?
That's automatic, and that goes into effect every 6 months.
Yeah, it's an adjustable charge, but if it's a special line item because of a special condition, would that be requiring a city council approval, or does that excess or surplus automatically get reinvested in the infrastructure?
There's a formula in the electric rate ordinance, and that's how the credit or the adder to the bill gets calculated, and that's automatic. It doesn't require city council approval.
Right, there's an energy cost adjustment charge, a regulatory adjustment charge, and a decoupling adjustment charge. This would fall in the regulatory adjustment charge. However, it's one of many components. So you'd have components moving up and down, and if on net they were, negative or below budget, then the customers would receive a credit. If on net they're above budget, then the customers would receive an extra charge based on regulatory requirements.
Well, that's been very helpful, Mr. Lentz. Thank you for the explanation. Were there any other comments or questions of the Commission? Great. Next item, please.
4D, Key Performance Indicator.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, KPIs, key performance indicators, these are performance measures that each department in the city are required to assemble at the outset of each budget year through council input and the city manager's office input and input from the department as well. Then we present those to the council as part of our budget and go back and update those every quarter. So I don't think we've brought these to you before, so I thought this would be something that you might be interested in to see as we get ready to do our next quarterly update, to bring to you at least the last complete quarter we had and go through those with you, show you the actual KPIs that we have and some of the performance that we've accomplished over this period of time. So with that, Martin Powers, who's been handling this for us, is going to give you a brief overview, and then we can answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Zern. Good afternoon, President Yao and members of the Commission. My name is Martin Powers, Administrative Associate for Glendale Water and Power. I'm here today to provide you with a very brief report on the Key Performance Indicator Program. I'm going to cover some of the same things that Steve just did, but you should have all received a copy as part of your packets. Beginning in fiscal year 2012-13, as part of a citywide coordinated effort, staff implemented a structure where performance indicators were collected and were updated quarterly, with the final tabulation occurring at the close of the fiscal year. At the conclusion of each quarter, performance indicators are presented to the City Council in conjunction with the quarterly budget update. It's important to note that GWP's performance indicators were chosen based on a standard industry metrics, as well as their alignment with our organization's 10 council priorities, which were established in fiscal year 11-12. With regard to GWP's indicators, the priorities are fiscal responsibility, exceptional customer service, safe and healthy community, infrastructure and mobility, and economic vibrancy. The KPIs will be published each year in both the city's annual report and the annual city budget document. There are a few reasons why we collect and record this information. There are short and long-term benefits associated with tracking of the key performance indicators. In the short-term, quarterly collection of performance indicator data will allow GWP to track important operational areas and help determine our level of success or areas which need improvement. The long-term benefits associated with collecting performance indicators is the ability to evaluate progress over greater periods of time. With the establishment of a permanent set of performance indicators, GWP can more accurately track its progress, since quarter-to-quarter and year-to-year comparisons will be based upon a consistent set of measures. With fiscal year 12-13 serving as the baseline year for which trend analysis to determine where and why fluctuations occur will be performed. The KPIs provide a snapshot of the vital statistics that make up the utility's operations and allows for the City Council, the GWP Commission, staff, and the public to get a better understanding of our operations, our output, our production for each division. So that concludes my very brief report, and I or staff are more than happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Mr. Carmichael?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Powers. Love this document. Yeah, thanks for sharing it. So I'm relatively new to the commission, and if it hasn't been shared in the past, I'd appreciate seeing it again in the future. But I want to try to understand some things. So you're saying that what exactly did the City Council help to establish? Do you have targets? This looks like performance or results. But I'm not seeing in the documentation here targets or what we were trying to achieve. Is that in here somewhere?
No, it's not in this particular document. That will be presented with the first quarter of this fiscal year, those particular measures or council priorities.
Okay. So you have 11-12, but I think I also heard you say that the baseline is going to be 12-13.
Correct. That's as a result of the reorganization that the city and the utility has gone through. So it's my understanding that the city manager's office would not want to, they want to be able to compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges. We have a different, I guess, operation now than we did in 11-12. So moving forward, 12-13 will be the baseline. Our operation hasn't changed very much since 12-13. And so going forward, we'll be able to compare apples to apples as far as our operations are concerned.
Okay. So then the follow-up question I would have is the methodology behind what you intend to measure as performance, is it sort of incremental improvement on the measures that you continue to do, where numbers are better if they're higher, that the number continues to tick up, or if a lower number is better, considered better performance, that it continues to move down? Is there a specific target that you're aiming for, and/or this is an area where I think benchmarks could really come into play. I mean, certainly, yeah, as a unique operation, even within this city, operation has changed versus this particular department in the past. But what I'd love to be able to see is that we're not just comparing our performance to our own, but comparing our performance to other relevant utilities.
And that we are doing that. Internally, we will be doing that. That's how we do internally set some benchmarks. It's not a function of this. We will have, once the baseline is set, you'll see council. And to go back and answer your question, yes, if going down is good, we want to keep going down. And if going up is good, we want to keep going up. I mean, that's the goal. But we will compare ourselves, as we constantly do in many areas, with other utilities of other municipal utilities of equal size and operations. So especially to the east and west, we keep a very close eye on what they're doing and compare that to what we're doing here.
And so then remind me then, when is the timing when we would see a report that includes those benchmarks?
Well, that would probably be more in line with an internal document unique to Water and Power that we would bring sometime next spring as we develop it. If you want to call it a strategic plan, a tactical plan, or whatever we end up calling it,
yeah,
that's where you'll see that. And we'll compare it, or we'll use these KPIs as part of that, but it'll be more of a Water and Power customized strategic plan or operational plan or whatever you want to call it as far as planning tool. But it will bounce some of these things off. But that's where you'll see the benchmarks. That's where you see the goals. That's where you'll see the multi 3 to 5 year planning process.
And so then another follow-up question is, you mentioned it's an internal document, so if I could ask you to touch on that internal, does that mean that it's not going to be a public document? And then also, so, you know, how do we how do we use these numbers? Certainly, I imagine you're talking about using it to help manage the business. But do these numbers, do these targets, benchmarks, key performance indicators, are they used to drive, incentive compensation, or how do these? What are the ramifications for meeting the numbers, exceeding the numbers, or falling short?
No, these aren't used for performance compensation. That it doesn't. We use this document if we have something that occurs or we see a trend, then we need to go in and start analyzing why that's happening. Is it because of an operational issue? Is it because we're understaffed? Is it because it's an infrastructure issue? Is it because we're not doing something we should be doing? So we use that as a document to pinpoint those areas where we may need to take a harder look at how we're doing things. Council will do the same. They will point it out. They'll say, why is this trending this particular way? Does it seem to be trending in a positive direction? What are you going to do? Let's see when you come back if you've made some positive progress in getting that reversed. But what I referred to as an internal document, still a public document. It's not part of the KPI process. So when we track things internally, in other words, as part of analysis and record keeping that we do on a regular basis, we do compare ourselves to the other utilities. And once we put together whatever our planning document is, that'll be a little bit more clear for everybody. And that is something that then goes out as a single document to the public. It's not on that list, but we'll talk about it when we get there.
Okay. Commissioner Jennings? Comments?
Yeah, just a quick question. I guess we're going to dive into this a few months down the road once we have a more robust report. Just a couple of things caught my eye. I'm not sure if you guys can address these or not, but a couple of health and safety things that I just saw here. Just one was number of reservoirs inspected and cleaned versus target, which I guess our goal is 6, but would only perform 3 in the previous year. And then the other one was chemical use per volume of water. That ratio went up about 300%, maybe more. It's on the first page, 21 and 20, number 20 and 22. I don't know if you guys know the reasoning behind those. Those just caught my eye. They were more health and safety things, so I thought that was kind of important.
We'll ask Mr. Boeg if he has specifics on those.
Man of all answers.
Good afternoon, Ramon Abueg again. On the number of reservoirs inspected and cleaned, we are revisiting the way we were doing. What we had before, we had a normal cycle, and with the budget issues that we had, I also asked them, what is the reason why we clean them every so often? And we are taking a look at that, if there's a standard, or it was just a process that we got used to. For example, we're looking at the Grandview Reservoir and connected that with the planned outage that MWD is doing. If we shut down the reservoir during the outage, we would be in trouble in trying to supply the water. So what we're trying to do is, do we really need to do that? Because it happens to be coinciding, so we are delaying that. In terms of the chemical use per volume, on item number 22, one of the processes that changed is we are now doing chloramination in North Glendale as opposed to chlorinating. So we are tracking whether or not there's some changes or some improvements. In fact, one of the reports I'm expecting from our water quality managers, how much cost savings or how much impact does that have in our operation by changing the process of treatment. Then in terms of the electric use per acre foot of water, we're still trying to figure out whether or not that's something that we should be tracking. This got started when we installed the solar bees. I don't know if you're familiar with the solar bees. That's solar-powered mixer that we're using, whether or not that's contributed to reducing the cost that we have in water operations. So these are numbers that we're tracking. Some of the goals might change depending on the operational changes that we encounter.
Commissioner General?
Not really, I guess. Not sure how number 22 got increased, but okay, that's fine. You said you changed the method. Instead of chlorinating, you're using
Chloramination.
and that increases the number, I guess, chemical use?
Well, the basis for this is 1112. I'm sorry, the 1112 was high budget during when we're chlorinating, and 1213 that started in August last year, we started chloraminating. So the numbers for 1213 should change for those items once we have those data, and that's what we're going to compare it against.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
I just have a few questions, Mr. Powell and Mr. Zone. Thank you for bringing this up. I think this is a very useful tool and continue to be a very good way to assess the utility operations and financials. So what I'd like to have continue is continue to leave that 2011 to 2012. I'd like to continue to see that, even though you guys mentioned there was a change in operations or management, but it'd be good to have that as a reference point too. And then, like you mentioned, use 2012 to 2013 as your baseline year. But like where Commissioner Carmichael mentioned that we need to have maybe another column for the goals. I know Mr. Bragg just mentioned that on the water section there were specific goals. So we can add another column maybe before your first column, 2011 to 2012. Put that next column on the left side, what the goal would be. If it's no goal assessed yet, then just put NA. I think it would be helpful for us to understand if there are goals in certain sections or not, and then have 2011 to 2012, and then include 2012 to 2013, and then a column like you mentioned with the newer numbers, so that we can at least look at those and compare year for year and then quarter for quarter.
That would be more along the lines of what I was referring to as we'll have a GWP customized report. This format won't change. This is what we give to council. We can certainly adopt this and then add to it or subtract from it if it's not useful information. But it'll be part of what we put together specifically for our plan in the department. This is the format used by every department. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the KPIs are different, and so to the extent that we develop something specific to GWP, I called it a custom report. That's what we'll work on, where we get benchmarks in there, where we get some of the things that you're...
But this report has only GWP information, right? Every page?
The city council, it has only GWP information because this is the GWP commission. Otherwise, what the city council gets is every single department. Every single department has these same format, these same type of categories, give or take, and then obviously specific to their particular operation, and that's what we present to the council on a quarterly basis.
Right.
So for us in GWP, we can expand on that by having our own internal document, I keep using that internal, specific to GWP, that then expands on some of the areas that you folks have mentioned.
Okay. But
and then that we tie into whatever our planning document's going to be.
Great. No, I think that's great, and I think at a minimum we want to see this type of format too, even though it's going to the city council and all the departments are reporting. At the minimum, let's say certain quarters where staff might not be able to get the customized report, then potentially this could be presented so that we can take a look at what the city council is looking at too.
Sure.
And the same type of metrics, and each line item is the same as what the city council is looking
Sure.
at. Any other points? The other item I want to suggest is maybe for the customized report, can we color code it so like when you do have benchmarks or goals in place for a commission report, can you customize with some color code where green is meeting, yellow is on target, and red is like behind goal or something like that? So I think that's been very useful for us to glance through this and look at the greens, the yellows, and the reds.
Certainly we can do that. Absolutely.
Right. Any other items? No comments? Thank you, Mr. Powers.
Thank you.
And we have actually one speaker, I'm sorry, for this item 4D, Mr. Herbert Milano. Yeah, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Commission President Yao, Glendale Water and Power Commissioners. My name is Herbert Milano. I'm glad to see a report coming to you, now hopefully on a regular basis every month for your review. As I sat here looking at these KPIs, I asked myself if a lot of these numbers made sense, just intuitively right off the bat. And In general, the answer for me is no. I'd have to dig deeply and basically study to see what actually some of these numbers really mean. And I think that's maybe the aim that I was trying to stress at the last meeting, that the information that is being presented to you for evaluation should tend to follow some of the best practices that are out there in the U.S. And I can probably point to a few cities that I think have historically done an excellent job of providing KPIs. One of the cities is Charlotte, North Carolina. The other one is Austin, Texas, Seattle, Washington. These cities have a long history of working with either management by objectives or the balanced scorecard, and they've been doing it for almost 2 decades. And they have polished these reports so that they become fairly succinct, they're summarized, synthesized, and they become fairly clear. I made a couple of suggestions last time with regard to what it would be a good report that allows us to look at trends. It is my opinion that that getting information across the years is a significant way for us to evaluate how the utility is doing within itself. So when we are told that you cannot compare this year to the prior year and we're going to start all over brand new from here on out, I generally don't buy that. Because, the cost to produce water or the cost to deliver the water, it should be calculated irrespective. If we have made significant strides in improving our operations to lower costs, then they should show up. And we should actually see a trend line. And those are the things that I don't get to see. Years ago, the city used to receive on a quarterly basis a report from the finance department with all the basic trend lines concerning key financials, and they were really quite good. We have not done that in several years. So it was my suggestion that we go along those, follow a trend line. But I did want to point out a few things on this report. Item number 15 is the number of water main breaks. I think is what it refers to, just says main breaks. We had 13 the prior year. We had, we have 9, so it looks like there's a significant improvement there. Water loss through the distribution system, item number 21, it went from 3% to 3.5%. So that's kind of unusual. You have an increase in the water loss, but you have actually fewer water main breaks. So they seem to be consistent, at least from a very cursory point of view. Then I looked at item number 60, bill affordability as a percentage of income average residential customer spends on the electric bill. I think that it is a much more valuable measure to look at the number of 48-hour notices given to customers for non-payment and looking at the trend line for that number. This is a number that I have brought before the City Council and before this Commission many times, that I believe that we should report on a monthly basis just what the impact is, especially on electric rates as they are coming up every single month. How many businesses and residential customers are being impacted such that they cannot afford to pay on time. And I think it is a much more meaningful number than 60, item 60. Because this is so vague that it's very difficult to assess whether there is, what the value of this thing is. I would suggest that instead of letting the staff bring to you their ideas of how they should report to you, that it be the other way around. You as commissioners determine what would be some of the key performances that you see that the public would want to know, that you would want to know, and have the staff fulfill it. This is a practice that I've seen in government and nonprofits for a very long time, and it seems to disempower you, and it disempower eventually the public that needs to see this information.
All right, thank you, Mr. Milano. Next item, please.
4E, Customer Service RKS Survey Report.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, I believe it came out of one of Ms. Valle's regular customer service update reports to you, where the question of do we formally survey our customers for feedback, and That answer was yes, we do it. In fact, we do it twice a year and every year. And so today we want to bring to you Mr. David Reichman, who with RKS, who has done the majority of this work for us, who's going to present to you the last actual survey that we completed, and we've got one that's ready to kick off probably next month. But this is the last customer satisfaction survey that we did, and so we're bringing that and the results of that to Mr. Reichman.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the board, members of the commission, thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to present the results of a survey that we did last December. So, and we'll get right into it. Our agenda really is to look at the goals and methodology, your scores, GWP scores, your scores compared to other municipal utilities, the meaning of these scores, and our conclusions and recommendations and prescription for improvement. Just a little bit about how we did these surveys. We're really talking about two surveys. One of them is a statewide survey done under the auspices of the California Municipal Utility Association. This is done every other year. The residential survey was done in summer of 2012. It was based on 500 interviews statewide. They were telephone interviews. And this has been done, I think it was done in 2001, 2002, 2004, 2006, 2008, 2010, 2012. The next one is slated for summer of 2014. It's done regularly, and most of the members of the California Municipal Utilities Association subscribe to this. Your survey was done in December of 2012 and was based on 200 telephone interviews. GWP we got the sample from GWP, we got your entire listing, and we randomly sampled your customers. It was done by telephone. GWP, we announced that GWP was the sponsor, and the average interview went about 12 to 14 minutes. There's a little asterisk here, well there should be actually. Going forward, the world is changing, and in the survey we're about to do, that Steve referred to, we're going to be looking at doing the survey online and on the phone. So we're doing a hybrid because the world is now wired, and the telephone interviews is not the sole way to get a representative customer view. Okay, moving on. I'm sorry, I turned it off. Moving on. This is a graph of satisfaction. And the question was, on a 0 to 10 scale, where 0 means you're dissatisfied and 10 means you're very satisfied, what is your overall satisfaction with Glendale Water and Power? And what the bars show is the percentage of customers who say they're very satisfied. And in 2011, which was the previous GWP survey, 68%, two-thirds of your customers said they were very satisfied with GWP. In the survey that we're talking about now, which was done in December of 2012, a year ago, 67% were very satisfied. So there was no change in your scores between 2011 and 2012. The line above is the mean, is the average. Across the entire distribution, your average score in 2011 was 7.9, and it was 8.0 in the most recent survey that we're talking about. Among California municipal utilities statewide, in 2010, which was the previous statewide survey, 55% were very satisfied, and in the 2012 statewide survey, it was up to 67%, so there was an increase there. And among investor-owned utility customers of California's IOUs, we also do a small sample of them, they went from 54% to 64%. So what it shows is statewide, GWP stayed the same, the Munis statewide went up, and the IOUs went up. So the question really is, how does this compare? And we're going to tell you. Your average score was 7.9. Remember, I said 7.9 was your average score, and in 2012 it went from 7.9 to 8.0. So there was really no change. You stayed the same in a very difficult business environment, but your customers saw you in 2010, 2011 the same as they saw you in 2012. But, and what this shows is the rankings of the municipal utilities which did oversamples like you do, where they did samplings of their own customers. And what you saw in 2010, Silicon Valley Power got an 8.3, AMP, that's Alameda Municipal Power in Northern California, 8.2, Anaheim, 8.2, GWP, 7.9, Riverside Public Utility, 7.9, Burbank, 7.9, Palo Alto, 7.8, SMUD, 7.7, and LADWP, 6.5. So your ranking was really in the upper range. You were in the fourth range, ranked fourth. If you look at the most recent survey, and just at the bottom, the average utility, the average municipal utility got a 7.2. So you were definitely above average in that survey. In the present survey that we're talking about, the one that was done a year ago, you had the same score, but your rankings dropped. How did that happen? Well, Alameda Municipal Power, which got a 9 out of 10, increased its score by 0.8 of a point. Silicon Valley Power, 8.7, increased its score year to year by 0.4 of a point. SMUD increased its score by a full point. Palo Alto Utilities, CPAU stands for City of Palo Alto Utilities, increased by 0.3 of a point. Anaheim stayed the same. Riverside went up by 0.3, and you went up by 0.1. And then Burbank dropped, and so did LADWP. The average score for all municipal utilities was 7.9, and your score is 8.0. So what does this say? This basically says that in 2010, you were in the upper tier. In 2012, you're average, at least according to this ranking of California municipal utilities. So now getting into some of the detail behind these numbers, which is really tells you how to fix the numbers. In terms of trust, how much trust do your customers have in GWP? In 2011, 64% said they had a great deal of trust. That went up 70%, which is right exactly where the Munis statewide average was and the IOU statewide average was. In terms of outages, which is really why your customers hire you, for reliability, 55% of your customers said they had an outage, which is a little bit more than the Munis statewide average. But when we asked them about how satisfied were they with their restoration efforts, 2/3 were very satisfied. Whoops, I'm sorry. 2/3 were very satisfied, which is exactly the same as the statewide average. 2/3 were very satisfied. Among investor-owned utilities, it's 3/4. It's a little bit higher. And the bottom line, in terms of power reliability, 80% rated excellent or good, which is exactly the same as Muni statewide and investor-owned statewide. Okay, moving on to price value. Here, it's a little bit of a challenge for you. In 2011, 28% of your customers were satisfied with the price they paid, and that stayed about the same. It actually dropped to 24%, which is way below Muni statewide. 50% were very satisfied with the electric price, and 40% of IOUs. But price and value are two sides of the same coin. On the value side of the equation, 69% of your customers in 2011 were satisfied with value, and that dropped to 38%, which is way below Muni statewide and IOU statewide. So the price-value dimension is definitely a challenging one for GWP. Part of this survey, and I can go through this quickly, was what about the bill? One of the reasons we did the survey was to find out with customers how customers viewed the bill and were they satisfied with the way it was laid out, and did it need to be restated and so forth. And what we found when we asked the question very directly is 62% were very satisfied, and another 26% were moderately satisfied. So in terms of satisfaction with the format of the utility bill, about 4 out of 5 customers expressed satisfaction. Doesn't mean that it can't be improved, but in terms of the way it is now, they're satisfied with it. And when you asked about the components of the bill, the way it's organized logically, is it easy to understand? Does it contain all of the needed information? Does it accurately reflect usage? You find 2/3 in most categories saying, yes, we rate it excellent. On this one, accurately reflects usage, about half rated excellent, and about a quarter say they're not sure. 2/3 of your customers really saw no specific billing or information needs requiring change. And most actually, when we asked them directly, does the current bill need to be redesigned? And most of them, only 31% said no, and 62% said yes. So by 2 to 1, customers did not support a redesign of the utility bill. In terms of customer service, most of your customers call GWP, and when we ask them to rate their most recent contact, they give scores that are really quite strong and respectable, as you can see here, in terms of first call resolution, the length of time it took to transact business, and their overall satisfaction. And you need to remember that people who call are usually a little critical to begin with, so these scores are really pretty good. Communication, well, we found a decline in the percentage of customers who felt that GWP was communicating with them effectively, from 56 to 52%, and it's right on the Muni and IOU average. That's where you stand. And when we looked at it a little bit deeper, what we found is it wasn't so much the clarity of the communication on the left side, but it was more covering the subjects that the customer wants to know about. That seemed to be wanting. Most were familiar with From the Source, which is a key communications medium from GWP, but really very few were aware of the fact that it's only going to be available online. So you had sort of a mismatch there. And when you ask customers, how do you want to get From the Source, how would you like to see it, about half say they want to get it in the mail. And about 1/3 say they'd like email. So customers, and we see this all over, that the digitalization of communication is something that's real, but communications today, there are people who prefer traditional means, and there are people who prefer digital means. And you need to serve both if you want to get your message out. And if you do one instead of the other, you're going to lose a certain group. And one of the reasons why a few say they've actually registered their email address, and most are not even aware of the need to register their email address. When you ask about communications generally from GWP, again, you see mail, U.S. mail, and email, almost, 43% and 35%, and bill inserts, which is the mail. When we looked at social media, that's coming, definitely, and those efforts are going to pay off. But in today's world, it's very minor. Social media has very, very low penetration, 2% Facebook, 1% Twitter. And again, when you ask them how do they want to receive rate information and important information from GWP, it doesn't change. U.S. mail, email, bill inserts. In terms of the website, 36% say they've actually visited the GWP website within the past year, which is more than Munis and IOU statewide, but they were disappointed. Only 51% say they were satisfied with their visits to the GWP website, and those numbers are much lower than Munis statewide or IOU statewide. Now, just a couple more charts. There's a real, you all are aware of the fact that there's a real revolution going on out there with smartphone and digitalization, and you see it here. In 2011, 31% of your customers said they owned a smartphone, and a year later, that went up by more than 20 points. 20 points, half your customers say they own a smartphone. And what does that mean to them in terms of the way they want information, the way they do things, the way they, what they want, when they want it, how they want it. And you also see that among those who own the smartphone, about half of them say the smartphone is my only phone. They've given up their landlines. I mean, life is changing. It doesn't mean that the people that, while half have given up their landlines, half still have landlines, so you have to serve both. You can't do one or the other. And I know it's tempting to look at one versus the other, but if you do choose one over the other, you're going to be missing out. So, we've come to the end, and really, I offer kind of one conclusion and a couple of recommendations. And the conclusion is that GWP is an average utility in 2012. And the reason is not because your scores have declined, your scores have stayed the same. GWP is average because other scores went up and yours stayed the same. And that's reality. And you see it not only in the rankings, but you see it in almost every single chart, so it's consistent. And I think that there are several prescriptions for improvement that I personally believe in looking at these results. One, with the improving economic environment, customers no longer expect continued cuts in service. They're looking for restored service. Now, I didn't show you the results from a business survey that we just completed statewide, but you really see it there. But I think it's happening on the residential side. Customers are looking for services, and they know that GWP and others have gone through problems. But when GWP says, we don't have the staff to do this, or we don't have the budget to do it, that's not what customers want to hear. They want service. Two, the price-value dimension and price-value proposition is very weak for Glendale Water and Power, and it needs to be addressed and communicated. Number three, your communications effectiveness is dropping, and effective communications is really the only way to reinforce the good things and correct the misperceptions. It's the only way to do it. Now, having said that, you can decide that you want to do communications digitally or through the internet, but if half your customers are still relying on mail and bill inserts, you're going to miss them. So you need to understand, and you need to have a budget and a work plan that emphasizes that the customer communication budget, which was probably stressed to begin with, is now bifurcated. You have digital customers and you have traditional customers, and both have needs and wants and information that they want to hear from you, and you need to talk to both of them. And finally, the fourth we've already decided on is getting an updated reading of residential customer satisfaction, because this is a year old and the world changes. And we're scheduled to actually do a survey in December and have results by year end. So thank you very much for your time.
Comments?
I'll actually ask a question.
Yes, sir.
You said you'll be conducting an online survey starting this.
It'll be online and telephone.
Correct. How are you? First of all, how are you guys preparing the online survey? Does RKS prepare the survey?
We do the survey, and we take responsibility that it's done properly and objectively and so forth.
And as far as okay, fine. And I'm assuming it's the same exact questions online and offline?
Yes.
Well, just want to clarify some of the samples that you mentioned. Well, thank you for the presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
I'm just interested in knowing who we asked to do a survey. What are the demographics of your respondents, and how were they chosen?
Okay, good question. Thank you, sir. You give us the Glendale Water and Power gives us the entire customer list, and we randomly select them. So we don't fill up buckets with old people, young people, rich people, poor people, fat people, skinny people. What we do is we randomly select, and the demographics fall out the way they should in terms of representation within the public. And we have all the demographics. I haven't shown them to you, but we have them, and they match up from year to year. That's the way we've been doing surveys for GWP and for the Munis for years. So it's done a random selection where you give us the entire list.
Would they also coincide with the demographics of Glendale? Because we have a high
they
population.
should. They should be very close. Yes, they should be very close. I mean, in other words, the sample that we get from by randomly sampling your customer list should be very close to the actual demographics of Glendale.
What about the surveys in different languages? Do you do those type of surveys?
I'm sorry?
Surveys in different languages?
Interesting question. It came up a year or two ago about Armenian, and we actually we actually translated the survey into Armenian. I think there are two dialects of Armenian. I don't know what they are, but I remember there were. And so we went through translation, and we hired interviewers to do this, and I think out of the 200 interviews, 5 were done in Armenian. So we can do that again. It was very costly to do, and we'll be glad to do it, but at that point, to go through all that work for 5 interviews, it probably, we didn't think it was worth it, but if you decide you need to or want to do it, we can certainly do that.
No, I'm just leave it open to staff and what the commission was interested in. But I'm really interested in looking at the demographics, because you mentioned that you randomly select people, but potentially if you randomly select people, the whole random sample could be all of a certain ethnicity or a certain gender.
5 chances out of 100 that it's a bad sample.
Right.
So, I mean, those odds are pretty good. I'll take them.
But I've seen surveys where...
What happens is, you know, we've done a lot of surveys for Glendale and for the municipal utilities in general, and by looking at the results, you can say this is a bad sample. You can look at it and say that it's screwy. People are it's just not lining up with previous surveys. It's not answering the way it should. If it's internally consistent, if it trends properly, and if it fits into, I've been looking at these things for over 25 years. I can tell this is a good one. This isn't, but we haven't found the bad sample yet.
Right.
I hope we don't hit it.
Oh yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, but potentially.
Yes, you could. There's 5 out of 100. Yes, 5 out of 100. You could hit a bad sample.
So I mean, if you can go back and look at potentially for future surveys, how does that match up with our demographics in Glendale, and potentially if you can report back on that,
Mm-hmm.
if we have 90% are pretty much outside the ethnicity that is predominantly in Glendale, then that could be an issue. Whereas if you do match up close enough to what the Glendale population represents, then I think that becomes more of a valid sample for a survey of this kind.
A credibility enhancer.
Right. Thank you.
I think the key question actually is versus ethnicity, the type of category of clients you're surveying. Are you surveying single family owned or versus, so what categories of customers do you survey, and understanding maybe how each category,
Well, what's ever in the list, if the list has, I'm making this number up, if the list has 75% single-family homes, then 75% of the sample should be we don't control it beforehand. If the list is 25% multifamily, then the sample should be 27. I'm sorry. If the sample if the list of customers that you give us is 20 of Glendale in total is 25% multifamily, then the sample that we end up with should be 25% multifamily.
Correct. In theory, I get that. But what I'm saying is, don't you then, if you have a list of you have a customer list, and I'm not sure if it's purely names or it actually gives you a category of, type of customer it is. Once you conduct the survey, you can actually very easily just look back and say, okay, we actually were very close to the general categories or demographics we were trying to hit. Mm-hmm. Do we do that, or do we just have random names, we pick randomly and hope that we're going to have a good sample?
Well, we look back and see how closely did this compare to the last sample and the last sample and the last sample, and if it's way off, then we know something is wrong. I mean, but we do go through a verification process, but and we'll do that. We can go back and look and see compared to what your sample is a list of names. It's not categorized by single family, multifamily, rich neighborhood, poor neighborhood, and so none of that is in there. It's just names. And we don't know anything about these names until we interview them, that they are single family, that it's a single person living in the household, that it's, it's in it has a high electric bill, it has a low water bill or something. We don't know that until we actually interview them. So, and you don't give us a lot. Sometimes the sample has a lot of information, sometimes it doesn't. If we ask for it, we can get it, but we can go back and compare, and we'll do that.
I think obviously if you don't have the information, it's one thing. I think we can probably get you the information, and it's a quick test to see, hey, you know what, we have an X percentage of customers that are single family owned. How many did we actually interview? And what does that represent as a part of the sample? If we're
and just where this is going to be helpful is we're starting now for the first time telephone versus online. We want to make sure the online piece and the telephone piece
Absolutely.
are both
Absolutely.
representative, and so we have to do that balancing.
That's why I'm asking. I think the more information you get next to that customer name, the better you can then verify to see if your sample size it matches to the city demographics. That's it.
Well, in addition to that, may I ask if you also consider income level? Do you ask the income question?
We ask income, and you usually find about 25% refuse to answer the question. So we always ask it, but are the poorest people not answering or are the richest people not answering? You don't know.
So how would you know if it's representative of Glendale? I mean, there's a mix of high-income and low-income customers. So how do you know if this sample is all tilted towards higher income or not?
Well, you can't force them to answer the question.
Right. So then,
we have to look at the other questions that are easier to get answers to, so we know if it is. In other words, if it matches up on household size and on single-family versus multifamily and some of the other dimensions that we ask about, then age, educational attainment, if those things people are more likely to answer. Income is a hard one. You can't force people to answer that
well, potentially that takes me back to my initial question, was the demographics, because Glendale Water and Power does have a low-income program where they can segregate out that list for you. So you can say, okay, this is the list of all low-income customers, so that prevents you from asking that income question. And then you fulfill, let's say, 20% of all residents are low-income. Then you go up to 200 people you respond. Maybe up to 44 of those people should be on the low-income program. Then you hit your target, so you know that the demographics on the low-income at least is made through the sampling. So you can potentially do those type of sampling where you hit a certain quota and then you move on.
The problem is you don't want to if the sample is basically good, you don't want to do too much adjustment. For example, if the true penetration, if in reality 25% of your customers are multifamily and 75% are single family, and we drew a sample that was 35% and 65%, maybe we wouldn't play with it. That you don't want to tinker with that. If we had the reverse, then we would tinker with it. So, there's an art form to this.
But at this point, you don't know, because you don't know if you tilted on a high income or a multifamily or single family. So at this point, there's no data that shows.
Income is something you can't get. I mean, we don't have access to the tax return, so you're not going to get high income people to respond. Income is not something that you're ever, you have to, the people who answer are, you can look at their income distribution and know that some 25% of them, it used to be 15% didn't answer, it's up to 25% who are not answering that question now, and you just have to live with that.
And that's why I suggest that you have a workaround where staff provides you a list of their low-income customers, and then you don't have to ask that question, so you know that they're the low-income segment, and you ask that question up to a certain point, then you don't have to worry about the sampling that yours is tilted towards the high income. You know that for sure, you're sampling.
Well, the other thing is that assumes that all of your low-income people are on your low-income programs.
Right.
And are they all?
No. That's why you have a sample. At least you know that at least 20% of your customers surveys are on the low-income program. So you have that.
Let me just inject. There's a couple of things that we got to be careful, and I would defer to Christine, is what we're using personal information to hone down a list. This is a survey. It's a random statistical sample. This is not what we are basing the future of the utility on. We're simply using it as a tool to help us. What you saw up there helps me a lot. I saw a number of things in there, not the least of which is I sure want to find out what some of these other utilities have been doing the last couple of years, because they're doing something really well to get their folks to respond the way they have. So I think, again, I'm not a survey expert, but my experience in having done this for many years, or having somebody, a professional like David, do this is, it's random. And to the extent you keep it random, as he said, we give them a list, and it probably comes pretty darn close to the makeup of the city in all of the different categories. But if we start messing with it, I don't know if it's going to be truly reflective. And on the other hand, there's a lot of time and effort involved in that. And to the extent the survey, as I said, that survey helps me. That it really does. And I think that we gain benefit and value out of that without trying to do too much work on it. But again, there are some issues I was more concerned about is we can look at data and screen people out based on their personal information. Plus, at the end of the day, they don't have to respond to the survey at all. They can just hang up on
Yeah,
you.
that's true, too, yes.
I think I agree, and I think the only thing that you want to make sure is you have a proper sample size, and the way to do that is very easy. Actually, it's just if you take a look and know what zip code your customers are from, then you can just make sure that you're getting a sample size that matches your
Can I just
the zip
interject?
code.
Glendale Water and Power has decided, as part of its oversamples, to do 200 interviews. Most of the other munis you saw on the list do 100. So your samples are twice as good. 200 is out of an infinite universe. It's
correct.
still a small number, but it's twice as good as some of the others that only do 100. So I think you were interested, GWP was interested in statistical precision and doing it right from the beginning and doing something that they didn't have to do. I mean, more interviews plus more money.
But I think you're right. I think we can go back and take a look at that and see, just simply by zip code, and see
Just
if
for
we've got,
future years,
if we even just have sectors of the city, we've hit all of those.
Yeah, it's a very quick and easy way of
Yes, we'll
just
do that,
verifying.
definitely.
I have a question on this one, if I can. Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate, Mr. Zern, you saying that this survey helps you a lot, because my question is around where we are from a target. How do we feel about the survey? So I appreciate, Mr. Reitman, you giving us the data, and the last page includes a set of recommendations from your firm, which I appreciate. I guess my question is really kind of for staff, and so based on this, how do we feel about the performance? And did we have a target to begin with? If we didn't have a target to begin with, can we establish one moving forward? And then, kind of to your point of, this is information you can use, so what is the action plan moving forward?
Well, I think we can certainly always set where do we want to be. Do we want to be in the top 5%? Do we want to be 1, 2, or 3 based on the comparison with the other cities, and we can do that. Do we want to use Northern California comparisons, or do we want to limit ourselves to Southern California comparisons, which is where we do all of our work? With our organization SCAPA and our comparisons have generally always been Southern California. We don't compare ourselves with Northern California. It just gets a little bit different in that particular environment. But nonetheless, do we want to be of the 10 Southern California utilities? Where do we want to be? We want to be in the top 2. We want to be in the top 10%. So we can certainly do that. What I use this data for, I think this fits in nicely with where I'm at right now, which is kind of building the new GWP, an image building campaign. We had our financial difficulties. We had to stop our capital program. We had to go for a 5-year on the electric side, pretty sizable rate increase in a bond. On the water side, it's not unusual for utilities to have to raise their rates, but I'd like to see us in a position with a rate plan where we don't have to have those rates. We have consistent rates each year that are somewhere around the CPI adjustment. So some of those things that you saw up there are going to help me do that as we begin to rebuild not only structurally GWP, but the image of GWP and who we are. And again, getting out to some of those utilities that jumped the way they did, they're doing something right. They're getting the word out. It looks like, as you can see, a lot of it's communication. We don't seem to be communicating quite the way at least our constituents want to see that information. As simple as mail. Kind of interesting statistic. You see half of our population, or half of those that were surveyed, have a smartphone, but the other half want to continue to get something in the mail. Now, I would say the other half, it may be some of the same people. So you have all this technology sitting in your hand, but some people like that hard copy in the mail. So that's something we have to reconsider. That was a budgetary issue. We've tried to get away from paper mailings, but in this particular case, that's important to our customers. That's what helps get the word out. That document is very vital in talking about what the utility has done and where we're going. We need to reconsider. Maybe mail, good old-fashioned way is the best way to do it. So there's a number of those things in there that I see that can help us become a better utility and help us as we evolve.
So thank you for that. Yeah. So if you would be amenable to looking at that, certainly I'd appreciate or ask for further comment here. But I would appreciate a discussion around, should we have a target? And if so, what should it be? So you're suggesting that perhaps not Northern California utilities as part of that comparison set, maybe something. So whatever that is, to make a decision, yes or no, will we have a particular target that we go for? What is the thinking behind it? And then we can use that to plan and prioritize our work, right? So if we fall short of our expectation for our performance and what we're doing for our customers, then we develop the action plans, and we can look at what the other utilities are doing. We can do our own process in order to improve our customer satisfaction levels. So I'd love to be able to have a follow-up on that at some point if we can.
And if I can suggest, I think the timing is, David, you mentioned end of the year for the next survey?
We're going to get the interviewing done at the end of the year. I'm going to send Craig and Etienne a proposal and a schedule tomorrow. So probably sometime in January we will have a report back and results back here in January.
So maybe the February meeting, we can present those results and at the same time talk about some of these goals. As far as I'm concerned, I want to be number one. Anything less than that begins to bother me a little bit. So, but we also need to be realistic of where we're at. We're coming back from some pretty fair challenges. So let's be realistic. But yeah, I think that might be a perfect time to talk about it. We'll get the 2013 results back in hopefully February. We can come back to talk to you about that and then talk about some of these specific things.
And thank you for that. And one of the things I'd like to be able to try to understand is how do these various things connect? So we had a conversation earlier this meeting about key performance indicators, right? This to me is one of the key performance indicators. And then also when we approved the meeting minutes in there, there was one of the items was an outlook on the strategic plan, which I guess would be, right, it's the action plan that comes from, how do we continue to perform in a manner that our customers expect of us?
I would agree. They all tie together. And so we probably need to get our planning document that includes all of these different components and have that single document that hits on it. Because you're absolutely right. This, in my opinion, would fall into the outstanding customer service category that we have in our key performance indicators. But that's something that will translate to whatever type of a document we put together, whether it's specific to GWP or citywide. Outstanding and excellent customer service are always our goal.
Yeah, I mean, the single most important and I think disconcerting statistic in the entire report is our collapse in perceived value as a utility among customers. Did your research indicate any information as to why that is? Is it purely a communications gap that the utility is suffering from? Or?
Usually, I remember over time, and I think you were always... On the price side, I think price sensitivity was never a strong point for you, but the value held up. This time, they both collapsed. And I think whether that was in response to your financial problems, customers' own financial problems, I mean, everyone went through something in 2008, 2009, 2010. And my sense is that it was probably more to do with that. But price value is something that the longer you get away from the event, if your service is good and you're, you communicate, you can recoup that, especially if you're a good utility, that GWP is. So I think you can recoup that, but it depends upon good customer communication, reinforcing the good things, working on the things that need improvement. I mean, I think they're doable. I think some of these other utilities that jumped had some of the same problems, and they overcame them. I mean, I know, in fact, that they did. I know exactly which ones, and I already talked to Steve and some of the staff about that.
Well, if I can ask if you consider next time you do present to this commission, if you can add some of the suggestions that we mentioned, maybe some demographic information, zip code information to see
That's
where they are.
Idea, yes, of course.
We're not making sure that not all these respondents are Northern Glendale or all Southern Glendale, Glendalians, so we make sure that we're all represented. So get back to Steve's point where we want to make sure this is very useful. I mean, I think we all agree that it's very useful information, but we want to make it more useful and more valid if we can see that it does represent the city of Glendale and its ratepayers.
We want to make sure we don't interview 200 of Steve's best friends.
Right.
So
exactly.
Yes.
One other question. I don't know if you do open-ended questions as part of the survey, but if you could give us some data as to once they ask the value question, why do you believe that GWP has that score?
That's a great point. What happens is if you have a lot of questions and you have short time, you do away with open ends. But we've already decided in the survey that we're about to do, we're going to add some open ends about value and about communications for exactly that reason. So the next time we come, we will have those.
So we have one speaker. Maybe you can hold off on the side, Mr. Reitman. Thank you. Mr. Herbert Milano, please.
EWP Commissioners, my name is Herbert Milano. I have been around looking at the Glendale surveys since, for at least the last 12 years as they come forward. There hasn't been a single time that I did not find significant things that were wrong with the survey or the methodology. At the last survey that was done, first of all, let me address the following. You were asking probably one of the most incisive questions that I've seen any group ask of a particular survey. The City Council hasn't done the kind of job that you've done, even though sometimes they've been presented before the City Council. So I commend you on that. The last time there was a survey, I went out to the Department of Water and Power and asked to see if I could find information about the source documents. What was the source data? How was it collected? This is what I was told, that the Glendale Water and Power collected the information and handed the list to the individuals doing the survey. I said, so let me get this straight, I asked. Did they themselves do the random sampling of all the database, or did, as you said, take a portion of the sample, selected it, and then gave it to him to do the survey? In my understanding, and I asked the question about 2 or 3 times, it was the last one. They selected the numbers and then gave it to the company to basically do the actual survey. Let me tell you why I have a problem with this particular surveys, and all of these that I've seen in the past. 30% of our population is Armenian, and a significant portion of them are not what I would call fluent in English. That means that if we're reaching a lot of them, the kind of answers that they approached, the kind of answers that they would give, the type of time that they would give to the survey, the type of attitude they would have would be significant. According to him, what we just said, 5 out of the 200 are Armenians, or that needed Armenian. That to me is a significant problem. I know I knocked on a lot of doors when I ran for election, and there's a lot of individuals out there whose English is really a difficulty, especially with the other data we have 20% roughly Asian, primarily Korean and Filipino, and then we have another 15% Hispanic. I think that there is a way to determine who it is that you're reaching. And we need to get back at the data to see if we really have a true representative sample. 200 out of 70-something thousand residents or dwellings is a very, very small number for us to try to get really the stratified results that you need. So you're asking the right questions. I know that I can get roughly an idea of what the income is by the precinct. The census data shows it all over the place. If I reach in certain precincts, I know that the income level may be $110,000 per household. In other areas of Glendale, $30,000 per household. So it's significant. So we have the language, we have the income issue, and then we have other issues concerning the type of questions being asked. How does a customer determine value? How would you say, well, what is the value of the Glendale Water and Power to you? How would it be phrased? How would it be answered? And what would the customer know? Or what would the customer know about pricing unless they know the pricing of some other relative? In 2009, Glendale had one of the highest electrical rates in all of California. I didn't know that until there was a survey done by another utility up north, Rosewood. So when the customers don't know what it is what the other charges are per kilowatt hour for electricity or for water, what would they know? 70% of the population lives in multifamily housing. A good proportion of them don't pay for the water. So how are they going to provide any type of opinion on the water? Are they independent ways of doing it? Yeah. You go through the major streets in Glendale, and you find a lot of stores selling water. Why? Because people do not trust the water or do not like the taste of the water. That's a relevant number. How many water retail stores do we have in the city of Glendale? That's another separate, completely indicator that maybe that does not line up with what is here. What else? How does someone know what a good design is for the bill? If they don't know any better, they've never seen any other bill. I presented here bills and examples of better layouts that could give you true information relative to what you did the previous month or relative to what you did the previous year. So people are not going to know, so what kind of answers are you really getting? So the purpose, what is the purpose here? Is the purpose here only for public relations to say, we are not doing it good enough? Apparently, from what Mr. Zern said, is we have an image building campaign to do. I don't think the purpose is for building an image. I think the whole purpose is to improve the services and the quality of the product, not how that perception of the people. Yes, it is indirectly, but it should not be the primary issue. What I see in Glendale time and time again is that the image is the most important, the PR is the most important, but the actual satisfaction, that's secondary or tertiary. Thanks.
Yeah, Mrs.
Just a clarification, I think that David mentioned that 5 people took advantage of the Armenian language translation service. He didn't necessarily say those were the only 5 individuals of Armenian American descent who participated. So
it would be safe to say that the rest chose English as part of the survey.
correct, and David can verify that. But
Mr. Reitman, may I ask about the proportion of languages? I know that Spanish is probably the easiest to translate, and Mr. Herman indicate that there's 50%, or maybe relatively. Can there be a Spanish option as well?
Sure. We just, excuse me, we just did a significant amount of work for LADWP where we actually had a Spanish language version, a Spanish language quota. We did focus groups in Spanish, so we can do that, and maybe we should. We were told originally that Armenian was a bigger group that we should deal with. We can do this. We can subdivide this many different ways. The problem is each time you do that, you're getting into money. So there is a price value, and I didn't mean to say that only 5 people, only 5 of the sample were Armenian. We don't ask ethnicity in the survey. We don't ask that because some of our clients felt that that was objectionable. We could ask it. Certainly, zip code is a great idea, but we could have a Spanish language version. We could have an Armenian version, and we're glad to do that. But when we tried to do this last time, and this was my point, it may not have been 5, it may have been 10, but it was a very small number, and it's not. We did it, and we built it into the cost. So you have to decide whether it's worth it to have that capability or not, and it's just a yes/no. But there's a cost to each time you do that with each language.
May I ask a few more questions about
Sure.
the sampling? Because, as you know, you probably know that I like looking at numbers and I like to evaluate numbers. But so the comment about staff providing you the sample.
What happens? We get a list. Either we get the list or an extract of the list, and it's usually most of the utilities give us 70,000 names if that's what it is, or 70,000 households. It's a computer printout. It's not. And I think. Sometimes 70,000 is too many for us to deal with, since we're only going to be doing 200 interviews, so we may get an extract of that. But it's a random extract. And the reason is that the reason that I have trust in this is that we've been doing these surveys. Mr. Milano's right. We've been doing surveys for 12 years. But for year after year, the trends are very similar. Now, if somebody is manipulating the sample, they're manipulating it the same way, but they're not. And that's a hard thing to remember how to do. It's just easier to say, here's your entire list, take what you want. And that's what most of the munis that we work for do. They give us the entire list. I don't remember personally whether we get your entire list or we get half or we get a quarter, but it's done randomly. We give you instructions. We give GWP, give us every nth name, and that's what the computer spits out.
he gets the whole list from us.
Okay. So GWP staff gives you the whole list, and you would run your own sampling from your company?
GWP does nothing. You help with the questionnaire. We go through what do you want to know, and then you finalize the questionnaire. Then you have nothing to do with it. We're the ones who administer it. We assure that we're talking to the people who are interviewed, that the interviews are complete, and sometimes a question or problem arises, and we deal with it. But GWP has nothing to do with that process.
Right. It sounds like there's some randomness in that sample, but as you go through your list, let's say you picked 1,000 names from the whole list, but potentially when you make your calls and you go down the list, if people don't want to answer, you
if they don't want to answer, you have to go to the next call. But you have what you call replicates, so you have a group that's representative, and if you're busy, you're at dinner, you're not able to, and you say I don't want to do this, then I talk to the next person. What happens in a residential sample, you have an infinite number. I mean, if you have 90% refusals, you're in trouble. But if you have 15, 20%, there's a certain acceptable refusal rate that you come to expect. And the other thing, just one more thing, and then I'll shut up. Telephone interviews are getting harder and harder to do. You know, first of all, you don't want to call somebody on a cell phone because they're paying the minutes to be interviewed. That's the first thing. The second thing is they don't want to be bothered. So even, you know, in the political campaign, you talked about reaching people on cell phones. It's a no-no. It's a very hard thing to do. Secondly, just people are much more. California is the hardest place to interview all over the country because more unlisted numbers. People are less cooperative. So that's why the idea of a hybrid online and telephone is a better way to do it.
And that's great. That's why the next sampling, next presentation, if you can come back with those demographics and zip code profile, that would help us understand who's responding and how we can deal with the validity of this. Even though it's very useful information, but how can we make it better and more informative if we do think that it does represent the city?
Yes, sir.
Any other comments or questions? Great. Thank you, Mr. Wright. Next item, please.
5, oral communications.
We have one call here, so Mr. Milano, please. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, President Yao, members of the Glendale Water and Power Commission. My name is Herbert Milano. At the last meeting, I made a particular observation, and I don't know if Mr. Cern was present at the time. But it's a concern about the delivery of financial information, financial statements of the Glendale Water and Power. For the last fiscal year, the release fiscal year ended a year ago in June. That's June 30th, 2012. We received the final financial reports in February of this year. And I think that for any measure, that's an unacceptable level of response. I mentioned as well that for most corporations, they need to start providing reports within 90 days after the end of their fiscal year. And you got about a couple of months to basically get them in, and submit them. Actually, maybe actually less for an 1120 form. The city of Glendale, like many other cities, tend to report their financial statements generally by around the middle of December. But there was a time about 14 years ago when the city of Glendale did report within 3 months after the end of the fiscal year. I don't see any reason why the Glendale Water and Power could not provide its financial reports within 3 months after the close of its fiscal year. In other words, they should have had those reports already completed by now. And it is of a significant concern to me when those particular reports are delayed. I'm making the suggestion that you should receive on a monthly basis the monthly financial report of the prior month, or at least the one maybe 2 months before, since it is at the beginning of the month that you meet. But I think it is important to start looking at those financial reports and see the trend lines as the year progresses, and seeing and evaluating, the expenses and the revenues of the utility, in a more proactive way. It is my belief that that of all the commissions that the city has, this is probably the most effective and judicious in following up and making requests out of staff. But I think that the city has still a long ways to go with regard to how you empower yourselves to ask for the information and expect the staff to deliver the information that you need to represent the information that the public needs and the accountability that the public expects. I see this as a significant problem throughout, not just in Glendale, but throughout cities in Southern California and throughout the state. We, as a public, are generally disempowered when it comes to making utilities accountable or making government agencies accountable. And the usual problem is obfuscation, misinformation, misinterpreting information, or downright lying to the public. And I'm not kidding you. I say it as clearly as possible. We had reports on the general financial statements as presented by the civil grand jury. And at the city council session, they absolutely discounted it completely, as if it were untrue, with misstatements and untruths. I never imagined that to be the case in government. That city officials who absolutely outright just lie to the public. No qualms whatsoever, and it is our burden, just a few of us who understand city finances, that basically come out and says, no, what you're telling us is not the truth. So not only do we have the obfuscation, the lack of information, the delay of information, but outright misinterpretation of information. Outright, complete. And so we need information on a continual basis that prevents the obfuscation and that increases the level of transparency. And it's in your hands from your level of experience to say, what is the kind of transparency that we need to provide the public? I ask for a few. How many people are being impacted significantly by the increasing rates in electricity? One of the measures is the one that I mentioned to you earlier. How many people have asked for either postponement of their bill or postponement of the payment or receive a 48-hour notice, some kind of monthly measure to see how it is impacting it. Because as these regularly scheduled fee increases come up, more and more people are going to be impacted, and as you well know, we really have not made that much headway with regard to unemployment and people in hardship. And that's part of what you do, represent those individuals who cannot, for themselves, speak. You're our voice. Hope you can take that forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Comments? All right, next item, please.
6, agenda forecast.
Let's see, there won't be a meeting next month unless staff change their mind.
Happy holidays.
So let's see, for next meeting, I think we had a couple items that were mentioned today that could be put in place for future meetings. I hear the survey update could be available by February. Mr. Zone, is that correct? Is that my
Yes,
understanding?
I think next month, well, we obviously have to bump the FIT report over to January, so we have that. Then we hope to have both the strategic plan and Mr. Reichman indicated the survey results for February, along with the legislative update. And I think Mr. Yao had mentioned to you, we're going to bring in our legislative advocate that the city recently retained and have them give an overview of where Sacramento's at, where we're going, and things that are pertinent to the utility, and an opportunity for you to ask questions. And then again in January, I thought we might go through the electric capital improvement project program with you. The electric bonds will have funded by the end of December. So I thought January might be a time to come in and go through those projects. You've seen them in general as part of the rate process that we went through, the rate review and your case recommendation to council. But I thought we'd put it together specific to what we have planned for the next 5 years and give an opportunity for you to review that, questions you might have. So now we have what's on that list. Utility modernization, I think I mentioned that we've got a pretty significant software update that we're getting ready to propose. We're getting very close to finishing our obligation to the Department of Energy on our original modernization grant. Mr. Boeg would love to give you a water services update. I think there was some question with some of the financial challenges we had, what was happening in the water department, but we'd be happy to give you an overview of that so you can see where our construction programs are going there as well. Energy risk management, we have our internal committee meeting coming up, so we'll be able to give you some level of update as I believe you all know, Mr. Campbell, our finance administrator, has resigned to take a job elsewhere, and the risk management function was a function of his office working for the CFO of the city, Mr. Elliott. So, but we'll be able to bring something to you and at least report out on any actions that the committee has taken. And then again, our legislative update, hopefully by then we'll have at least an outline of a strategic plan or some sort of a planning process that we can then get your input on.
You're talking that you've moved to
This is
February.
I'm sorry, yeah. And also the survey update, along with the legislative update.
So let's recap for the January meeting. There'll be the 3 items listed: the utility modernization update, water services division update, and the energy risk management update.
Plus the FIT
Plus-
program.
Plus fit in. Plus, I heard you say something on the electric
Capital Improvement
Capital
Plan.
improvement plan.
Those are 5 items. Anything else? January?
Well, it's sort of a process issue, so I was glad to hear you say, Mr. Zern, that we would cover the strategic plan outlook at some point, January, February. Now it looks like February. As a process, there were a couple of things that were captured in the agenda that did not appear on the forecast. So I don't know if that's up to us to, make sure that we're connecting those points, but
Typically,
one of them in the October 7th agenda, that item number 3A, there we had Mr. Abweg saying that he would come back and present a report to the Commission with comparison performances and benchmarks comparable to our neighboring utilities, including industry-owned utilities in January or February, and it does not appear on the January or February outlook. So is that the type of thing that we can have from staff, that is to make sure that as we have either commitments or requests reflected in the agenda, that they are in the meeting minutes, that they are then captured on the forecast? How can we button that up?
We'll get that. We'll take care
Yes,
of that.
that's something we should take care of for you.
Yeah.
Okay, and then elsewhere, on a related matter, were safety benchmarks for the last 12 months. Also, I think, President Yao, you had asked for something on RPS to come back in that early January, February timeframe.
That was that related to what Mr. Lins had already presented on the dividend allowance?
That's what we thought.
Yeah, I think it was all tied into
So
that.
we've covered that piece.
We had that today.
Okay, so then when we see the strategic plan outlook, would that be the appropriate time in February? Then also, we talked about these are all connected, right? Have the strategic plan, the KPIs, customer service satisfaction target, all that would be in that February meeting?
Well, that's what we'll kick it off and get the whole discussion started. I don't expect that I'm going to pin you into one meeting, get it out now or forever hold your peace. If we need to take a little longer, we will. It's an important document. I don't want to rush it to the extent that we want to make sure we put some quality together on that.
Great.
That's when we would kick it off, so to speak.
So relating to the KPIs, when would be a good time to put on the agenda quarterly to look at the KPIs that were presented today? Would that be on a quarterly basis, every 3 months from this month?
It would be, we'll have to see how it coincides with the council agenda. So, and then we'll work the commission meeting in as well. But it is a quarterly update.
Usually, when does that take place? When staff is presenting the information to council?
I'll have to find out. Offhand, I don't know. I
Because
think
it's
it's
one
the
of-
middle of the quarter. After the quarter closes, it's the middle of the next month.
Okay. I was wondering if it's more appropriate to just put it in the agenda forecast now so that we don't forget when it does come up. We can always move it around, as you mentioned, depending on when City Council hears it. Can we put it up every 3 months just as a placeholder?
Yeah, I'll look at when we actually do it and pick the right time. And
So the end of the next quarter will be the end of December, right? So
That's correct.
potentially this could be updated. The KPI should be updated in January or February.
could
So
be,
maybe
yeah, likely the February meeting.
So
as well.
can we add the KPI as part of the strategic plan update? So every 3 months from February, we can put KPI on February, and then May, and then August.
To the extent that we roll it into our strategic plan, then we'll have an update on that document, which will include the KPIs, and then, as you mentioned, the whole red, yellow, green kind of color coding,
Right.
and then kind of dig into it from there.
Right. That'd be great, but in the meantime, we can put a placeholder
Sure.
that we can discuss the KPIs every
Sure.
3 months, then it'll be on front mind. Anything else?
Yeah, I just wondered if there might be any value in having duplicating the legislative update for January as well. The legislature has a bill introduction deadline in late January, so if we were going to consider supporting or sponsoring any legislation, that might be the time to do it. I don't
Yeah,
know.
we may even, we haven't had a chance to talk to the lobbyists yet, but we will. If they think that's a better time, maybe we'll put it in the January meeting.
Yeah, so I open to either option or both if it's better for the lobbyists to come in February. But I just don't want to miss out on our deadline date with the legislature if we're going to if we're thinking about sponsoring any legislation.
Absolutely. So even if we don't get the presentation from our lobbyists, we'll have staff do something in January in legislation.
What's the process for the city council to put a position on each bill? Do they get to review them, or they just accept what the lobbyists and CMAU might think is the right position?
The lobbyists will come in and at some prescribed time and talk to them about an update of where we're at, but individually the departments will bring forward legislation that they feel is important enough where we want council to support that. Sometimes it's the city manager who would support it. Sometimes a formal resolution is done by council to support it. So we have a variety of ways of staying on top of those
Right.
things.
So January might not be the ultimate date we
Well,
input
yeah,
on.
for support and opposition to legislation, that's absolutely true. We can do that at any point during the year, depending on what those bills say. But if we're actually thinking about sponsoring a bill that might benefit the utility and run it through the course of the year and just sort of bird dog that bill through the process, we have a narrow window, which is when the legislature has bill introductions, and that ends in late January. So we might want to consider what our options might be if we might want to recommend to the council that, hey, we should sponsor a bill that does X, Y, Z to benefit GWP. Early January would be the best time to do it.
And we'll probably end up talking to SCAPA folks and see where because they'll have a pretty good outline of where we're going to be going that year.
Well, I'll be supportive of that, Commissioner Hale, to put that legislative update in January as well and February, so that we just have a line item, even just for temporary discussion. If we don't have any bill to sponsor or not,
Yeah,
then
we
we
can
still
always
have a quick
continue
discussion. Right. As Ms. Cadena has indicated in the past, we need to agendize an item if we want to discuss it. So let's just agendize that item for January as well, legislative update.
Would it make sense, I appreciate that perspective, would it make sense to, for January, to characterize it as a legislative update in consideration of bill sponsorship, something that's closer in line with what you were suggesting?
I guess we'd want to know if we intend to sponsor any bills. We don't want to have a mistitled item, so we might have to see how that plays out and then title it appropriately as we determine whether or not there's any legislation that we intend to sponsor.
Well, I mean, I don't have any particular ideas in mind. I think we would want to get a report from staff as to what legislative fixes or changes to the law might benefit the utility or fix some problems that we have coming up over the next couple of years. So we might want to ask for a report from recommendations on legislation, potential legislation to sponsor from staff, something like that.
Okay, we'll come up with an appropriate title.
Thank you.
So that'll be the sixth item on January's meeting. Any more items for future meetings? If you notice there's an option, you can always let me know if there's hot pressing issues coming up the next 2 months, that I can talk with staff to see if there's anything that we can put on for the January meeting. And of course, staff can always let us know if they don't have items that they're ready for, then we eliminate those things too. Okay, anything else? If not, let's move on to the next item.
7, adjournment.
We have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you. See you in January. Happy holidays.
Yes.